Hello, podcast listeners. This is Ed Franklin with the Ed Franklin No Limits podcast. Thank you for listening today. We're going to do something fun, a little different today, but you should get a kick out of this. I think it doesn't matter who you are. You should be. It's funny a little bit. You can always contact me at edfranklin.nolimits@gmail.com. If you'd like to be a guest, or you know somebody that would like to be a guest, we can chat about it and see. I get really good guests on all the time, so I'm always up for that. Thank you for listening to my 100th episode last week. I got a lot of views. It was pretty interesting. I did it live. The live thing's fun. I mean, it's just a little harder to navigate, but I always record them so you can listen to them again. Again, you can contact me at edfranklin.nolimits@gmail.com. So something kind of cool happened the other day. I got contacted by a company that owns babyboomer.org. And they asked me if they could put my podcast on their website. And they have several podcasts on there. I'm not the only one. But I was like, yeah, sure. I mean, if I can get more listeners, that'd be great. And since I am a baby boomer, I thought, why not? So just so you know, baby boomers are born between 1946 and 1964. I was born in 1962. Makes me a baby boomer. And what prompted this podcast was I was watching a TikTok video. And this young man came on a split screen with a woman. And he said, he had long hair and a beanie on and no shirt. Young guy, probably 25 or so. And he said, so let me get this straight. You guys, you had to drink out of a hose all the time. There was like no such thing as a sink. And the gal kind of funny says, you got this? You want me to take this? I'll take it for this kid. So she starts kind of reading him his rights on how it was being a baby boomer. And the thing that was funny was she says, and it didn't mean we didn't have sinks. It means we weren't allowed in the house. So I'm going to tell you some stories about when I was a kid and how my parents raised me. And my parents were both very intelligent people, had their own set of problems, just like all of us do. And they weren't formally educated, but they had a lot of common sense. And I think most of our parents, if you're a baby boomer, had a lot of that common sense. Things were very different back then, obviously. We went through a technological revolution that's changed the whole world. And we didn't have that when we were kids, We didn't have computers. I didn't operate my first computer until the 80s, I think. Yeah, maybe the 80s. Late 70s, I worked in the grocery business, and we had some computer type ordering apparatus that we used. In fact, if you remember the and the big mechanical cash registers, that's what we had when I worked at the grocery store. And I'll tell you a quick story about that. We had in 1978 and 80, right in there, 79, we had some torrential downpours. I mean, like Lake Hodges was right touching the freeway on the 15, where now it's just looks like a desert out there. That's how much rain we had. The store was flooding. We had fires. We had all kinds of stuff going on back then. And I remember one time the power went out, and they stuck this piece of equipment in the side of that machine, and we had to ask all the people to leave the store. Well, the people that were in the store and had things in their basket, we could check them out, but you couldn't do it for very long because we had to wind these things with our hand to keep the machine going. And every time the checker would hit those buttons, it got harder to it wasn't really smooth. So we had to crank it. It's like, when you see in the 20s how they had to start a car, they had to crank the engine to get it going from the front. We had to do that to cash registers. So I was born in Seattle, Washington. My dad was in the Navy. My mom, I was the last of 4 kids. And she did not like Seattle at all because, kind of like we had here the last 2 weeks, she hadn't seen the sun in 3 months. Now, I get depressed when the weather gets like this. It's never been that bad for 3 months. So I'm up to my ears with it already in just a couple of weeks. But imagine this stuff going on for 3, 4, 5 months. And she just says, look, we're moving to San Diego. So my dad came down, my family came down here. I think my dad was stationed at North Island. And my parents bought a house in Poway when I was 2 years old, kind of near the house I grew up in, actually. and couldn't afford it and lost the house. And then we moved to Ocean Beach in like a granny flat at my aunt's house, like a back house. I don't know if it was a granny flat, but so, and that's where I have a very good memory of when I was a child, and I can remember certain things that happened back there. And look, this podcast is not to demean millennials by any means. It's just we grew up in a different time, and when we tell you how tough we are, how tough we were, we grew up differently, man. And I'm going to tell you some stories about stuff that happened and why baby boomers think they're so tough, and some of the stuff we went through. So I vividly remember I was at the. I'll tell you two things. We had a lightning storm, I remember, in Ocean Beach, and we were, locked up in the house, and it was pouring rain, and the lightning was lighting up everything. And I can remember how scared I was of this lightning. I was only like, about 4 years old, 3 years old. And I can remember, if you can believe this, seeing Captain Crunch, because we had a TV and we'd see Captain Crunch commercials, black and white TV. And I remember seeing him and getting the shit scared out of me, and then having my mom just laugh about it and my dad laugh at us. They weren't concerned with our well-being necessarily. They knew our imagination was running away from us. And I mean, of all the silly things to see Captain Crunch, but the point to that little story is that my mom and dad just laughed at us. They just thought it was funny that we were scared. And and it wasn't, they didn't react like people react now. They got to coddle their kids. They didn't coddle us, right? We didn't get coddled. I don't even remember. I kind of remember my mom hugging me once when I was about 5 years old, maybe at a birthday party. And that was the last time I really remember her hugging me. She probably hugged me more, but we just didn't. We didn't grow up like that. We didn't grow up getting coddled. We didn't grow up getting trophies all the time. We didn't grow up not everybody got an award. If you didn't perform, you didn't get shit. And that's just the way it was. And that's what made you perform better, right? If you thought that, certificate or award was better than not having it, then you worked harder. So I can remember at that same location, standing standing outside of the house in like an anthill and having these red ants crawling all over me. I mean, I thought there was thousands of them. There was probably 10 or 50. I don't even know how many there were, but they were biting me. And my mom, again, the way they took care of things is she just had me stand out in the yard and sprayed me off with the hose so I could get all the ants off me, even though I was getting bitten and stuff. And, and then it was like, go back and play. You're done. We got the ants off. You stop complaining, go back and play. And I think by today's standards, somebody would have called CPS on my parents and had them arrested or something and had us taken away. But, that was the way things were back then. When I was 4 years old, my aunt helped my mom borrow money for a $10,000 house. And it was in East San Diego in a very bad neighborhood. It wasn't that bad then when we went, but it was at Euclid University. For those of you to know the area, it's not a good area. It's a terrible area now. Might be a little bit better than it was, but and I went to Euclid Elementary from kindergarten all the way through sixth grade. Back then, you went to sixth grade in the school. Out here in Poway, you go to fifth grade, then you move on to middle school. But I remember so many times this house we lived in was up on stilts, like you could crawl under the house from one end to the other if you wanted to, but you didn't want to because there were spiders and whatever else there was under there. It was all just dark. There was pipes underneath the house, but you could literally crawl from one end of that house to the other, and it was all on some kind of blocks or something. It was a one-bedroom house with a living room and a kitchen, and then it had this family room on the back, and the floors were made out of wood, but they weren't nice wood. They were just like you could see the ground underneath these boards. And we were not allowed in the living room when we were kids. That was for when guests came over. So we spent most of our time in this family room area, which had a sliding glass door and then a big step down, maybe 2 steps down to the ground, which was the backyard. And the backyard was filled with pepper trees. And that is just, I don't even remember having a fence. We must have had a fence because we had a dog at that time. And we had a gigantic German Shepherd. Her name was Princess. And, things like this, like my mom gave this dog a bone one time, a big ham bone for her to chew on. And I went in the backyard and reached in the dog's mouth, and my mom was standing at the sliding glass door, like, horrified that this dog was going to bite me. And she didn't. I just took the bone out of her mouth, and she kind of stared at me, and my mom ran out and gave the bone back to the dog. Speaking of that dog, I can remember the kids taking me for a walk in like a stroller or a wagon or something. And we got down the end of the street. We had a bunch of friends on the street we played with. All my brothers and sisters were older than me, and I wasn't really that, I wasn't out playing all the time with them because they were older, but they got into a football game in the street, just, two-hand touch or whatever it was. And they left me in the driveway of these people's house and didn't even pay attention to me. But this dog Princess, just stood there and made sure that I didn't get hurt. Right. So this dog was, I don't know if it was trained, but it was trained enough not to let anybody hurt me. And of course, I think my brothers and sisters got in trouble for that, leaving me in a driveway. But back to this house. So my dad, so we did a house edition. This house was old. It's like the garage was going to fall over at any time, and all the side of the house and inside the garage was just gravel on the ground. There was no concrete. We had a driveway that was concrete and a porch, and it went down to the sidewalk, but it was all uneven and chipped up, and my parents couldn't afford to replace this driveway, so you lived with it, right? The parents parked in the driveway, and we lived with it. I remember when we were moving in, we had RC cola and peanuts. My parents gave us, I don't know why we had RC cola and peanuts. We used to drink RC cola all the time, and we were putting peanuts in the RC cola. And what happens when you put it in Coke, Pepsi, or whatever? It overflows. So here, we think this is funny. We got our mouths on the tips of the bottles. We probably got sick that night from drinking all that soda, but I don't know. We had pretty iron stomachs too. We didn't get sick very often. And because when you did get sick at my house, if you had the cold or a flu or a fever, my mom would give you castor oil, and one spoonful of castor oil would clean out your entire body. It was like for you older people having a colonoscopy, and for 2 days you got to drink that shit that cleans out your body. That's what castor oil did for you. So, needless to say, we didn't get sick very often because I didn't want any castor oil. I remember her giving it tasted terrible. And like I said, she'd only give you a spoonful, but she'd give you an apple slice or half an apple to eat to kill the taste of the castor oil, which did not kill the taste of the castor oil. It just made the apple taste like shit. So, but again, that was one of those things we did. We didn't have all these over-the-counter medications. You had castor oil when you got sick. You got a spoonful of castor oil, and that was it. So my dad, to make the house bigger, they don't have a lot of money, right? And they got to do something on his own. He and a buddy, I guess, poured a slab on the side of the house, kind of off to the side of the family room. They put a 3-foot brick wall up around that room, and I'm guessing it was, 15 by 30 feet, maybe, that slab. They put a closet. It's just a stand-up closet in between the rooms, so 2 boys and 2 girls could sleep in there. The room, it had the windows were plastic, like you could just like the plastic you would put down if you were going to paint, a little heavier than that. So you couldn't see through the windows, but they would let light in, right? And then, of course, and then you knew when it was dark because you could see through them, but they were kind of opaque. There was 2 doors on this thing, one that went out where the boys slept and one that went out where the girls slept. And they were just these rickety fucking screen doors. Like, they had plastic on them too, but I could like a 10-year-old could rip these off the hinges. I mean, that's how light they were. So we weren't, and that's where we slept. We slept there for, we lived in that house for 8 years, and that's where we slept. And we used blankets. We didn't have heat or any air conditioning in that room. We didn't have heat in the house. I don't think there might have been a wall heater somewhere, but when it got cold, you put clothes on, you put a jacket on, you put a blanket on, whatever you had to do. So many things happened when we lived at this place. I can remember once, and I'm going to be saying that sentence. I can remember once because these things are going to come to me. As I was telling Kit the other day, all these stories, and when I think of these stories, it blows me away because I'm serious. If it would have been these days, CPS would have taken us away. But it wasn't horrible. It wasn't bad. It wasn't have any bad memories from it. It was just what it was. That's the way we grew up. And when you talk about drinking out of the hose, we weren't allowed in the house on Saturday mornings. In fact, you left the house at 8 o'clock in the morning, and when you hear these jokes about coming home when the street lights went on, that's what happened. We would go take our bikes out. Bikes. If we had bikes, some of us didn't have bikes, and when we did get them, they were pieces of crap that we were working on all the time, but they were still transportation. But so my mom would kick us out of the house Saturday morning. She would clean house. And if you cut yourself or something happened outside on the bike, or you crashed or whatever, she would, I just remember her yelling at me, do not bleed on the carpet. In fact, stay outside, wash your leg off with the hose, and here's some napkins, put napkins on it until it stops bleeding, and then go play. Just that's all. That's what we did. We crashed all the time. I got my first bike when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and my dad bought this, paid for like $5 for it or $10 for it. It was this little shitty bike, and for some dumb reason, I could only ride it one direction. Until I learned how to ride the bike, I could only ride in one direction. We weren't allowed in the street back then. I was little, so the kids would be playing in the street, and I would ride my bike on the sidewalk. And I can remember we lived on it was flat where we lived, but down the way a little bit, there was a big hill. And I decided I was going to take the bike down that hill, ended up crashing on my bike. I still have the scars from that crash, by the way. And I was only 4 or 5 years old. I still have the scars. I got a lot of scars from when I was a kid on my body, just because we didn't have helmets. We didn't have pads. We usually, if we had shoes on, it was an anomaly, right? We usually had shoes on. Probably didn't have a shirt on either. We just, hung out and did whatever we did. But I crashed this bike, and I remember coming back and same thing. Well, dumbass, why'd you go down the hill? You weren't supposed to. Get the hose, rinse off the scars. Do not come in the house with that blood, and keep riding your bike. So that's what we did. We had bruises and bumps and scratches all the time. We just didn't have all these things you have now that were distractions. We played outside. We played football, baseball, basketball, depending on what the season was. We didn't play hockey. My brother played hockey when he was a teenager, but soccer was not a thing. It wasn't even around back then. We did a lot of things at the school. We would go play basketball or whatever at the school. But I remember my brother was riding down the street one day, and we had this gigantic palm tree out in front of the house, and it probably had, I tell you, when they cut this thing down, because they've torn this house down by now and built apartments. When they tore that tree down, there probably had to be 35, 40 balls in this thing. I mean, we would lose balls in there all the time, and have to beg our parents to get another ball because it was enormous. No one ever cut it. It was huge. Our front yard was kind of had grass on it, kind of had dirt. We had this big tree that all the stumps were sticking up, all the stumps, but the what do you call them? All the stuff was sticking up from the tree, the stuff running off the tree, roots. And that's just the way it was, right? My parents, we were outside playing all the time. But my brother's riding his bike one day, and he runs into this palm tree, like head on, full speed, no brakes, I'm sure. Nothing. He goes to the front door, bangs on the door. My mom and dad come to the front door. What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? My brother had either broken his nose or hit so hard that both of his eyes were black. His nose is bleeding. And same thing. Don't get blood on my carpet. You dumbass. Why'd you run into the tree? Go play. And they were laughing. I remember them laughing at him. And then we were all laughing, right? It was pretty funny. He looked funny anyway. But, again, I'm not saying we were tougher than you millennials, but shit was different. I treated my kids a lot different than we were treated when I was a kid. And I'll fast forward to when I had grandkids and I'd take them to my mom's house. I had my three older kids at the time. They'd get a little scratch or a cut or something, and my mom would take this box of Band-Aids out and start putting Band-Aids all over them. This is her grandkids. And I'm like, Mom, where were the Band-Aids when we were, were you saving them up for your grandkids? Because I never had Band-Aids when I was a kid. You never put them on us. And man, I wish my mom was alive today, because if she was on here, she'd be crying, laughing right now because of some of the shit we went through as baby boomers and as kids. And I'm not even scratch the surface of the shit that's happened when I was growing up. And I'm going to bounce around a little bit with ages, but I can remember being in first grade, and we were at, I went to a school I went to was indoors. You could exit the school to the outdoors, but you could, if it was raining or something, you could go to all your classes, or we stayed in one class mostly because I was in elementary school, through hallways, right? The auditorium was through a hallway. When it was raining, we'd eat lunch in the auditorium. We had there was a stage in there, and then other rooms. There wasn't all these fucking rooms like these schools have now. They have, performing arts areas and they have places for the band, and we didn't have that. We had classrooms. That was it. We had a dinky little library and an office. I remember I was in there quite a bit, unfortunately. But this was all heavy duty stuff. Like, so the doors on the bathroom were solid wood. They were not hollow like they are now, and they were heavy. So there was a bathroom down by the restroom down by the first grade class where I was in class that day, and we were playing tag at break or lunch or something. And we were outside running around, and ran into the bathroom to get away from these girls that we were playing tag with, and figured, I'll just go out that back door, right? So as I'm running towards the door opens and hits me right square, right in the middle of the forehead. And like I said, here I'm running full speed as a little kid, not too fast, but it's pretty fast when you're a little kid. And here I hit this solid door right on the corner of the door, and it puts a crease in my head, like fucking, like it felt like it was an inch deep, this crease, and my head starts swelling up and my eyes and everything. And I can remember them taking me to the office. They had put ice on my eye by then, or my head. And they call my mom, and I remember I can hear the conversation, and my mom's like, "You got to be kidding me! I'm right in the middle of something. Just send him home." I walked to school, so it was like 2 blocks home. She goes, "I will leave now. You let him leave now, and we'll meet him in the middle." And they're saying, "Mrs. Franklin, are you sure this kid?" You know, I don't even think they knew the word concussion back then. I'm sure they did, but said he's hit his door really hard, and he's got, his eyes are all glassy, and he's got a big bump and a crease in his head, and he's not bleeding, but his head's swelling up. She's like, "You know what? He hits his head all the time. Just send him home. I'm right in the middle of something." So they get my lunchbox. Here I go walking home, and my mom met me halfway, and she was, you know, she was irritated at me because I ran into this door because I wasn't paying attention and she had shit to do. So again, I'm not saying we were tougher, but we didn't get coddled. It was dumbass. Why did you run into the door, kind of thing. God, there's so many stories. There was the time my brother, he had a '55 Chevy. Just by this time I'm about 10 years old, and I got a really good arm. I've been in junior Olympics in the softball throw, and I could throw a football, and I was a good athlete for being a kid at that age. And my brother's driving the '55 Chevy, past the front of the house, and I take this football and I throw it at his car, and I hit him in the face while he's moving. Great pass, by the way. But he stops the car, starts chasing me, and my brother was very fast. But that day, I was a little bit faster than him because he chased me down the side of these bedrooms I told you about, these brick walls, and I ran into the back of the house and grabbed my dad and got behind him. And my mom was standing there, and there's like my brother's yelling, "This little asshole," or whatever. He just threw this ball at me and hit me in the face while I'm driving. And I'm standing by. My brother wasn't that much bigger than me, but he was really tough. He was 7.5 years older than me, so I'm 10 years old. He's a teenager, and my dad pulls me away from the side of him, or from back of him, hits me and knocks me. I think he almost knocked me out. I mean, I was down on the floor, and here's my mom's sympathy. "Gary, not in the head." She tells him, "Don't hit him in the head." Well, it was too late. I was already on the ground. And you know what? The reality is I deserved that. I deserved to get hit. I mean, if his car would have been out of control, there were other kids out in the street, he could have killed somebody. I mean, it was a stupid thing for me to do. But again, no coddling. Stupid ass, do not throw balls at cars when people are driving. And I can remember, it's a lot of you baby boomers are going to remember Wild Wild West. And I watched that show for, a couple of episodes through the tears that I was crying. And we did not get no sympathy to us. That was a stupid thing to do. And I went to bed, and the next day we moved on. But this is a way, like I said, I never thought of it as abuse. I never thought of it as our parents, being mean. I thought of it as it was common sense, right? You don't throw a fucking ball at a car, especially when someone's driving and hit. And it was just luck of the draw that I hit him in the face. I mean, like I said, what a fantastic pass. I led the car and hit him in the face through his passenger window. And but obviously not funny. I mean, like I said, he could have hurt somebody. And then me running in the house of my mom saying, "Gary, not in the head." I'm like, "Mom, maybe don't hit me." Maybe that's a better way to do it. But I deserved it, right? I deserved that. And And that's just the way it was. Man, so many other things. We were riding bikes. I grew up with two brothers down in East San Diego, and I'll say their names because they're. I think I know one of them's passed away. They were Ronnie and Johnny, and these guys would get in these fights. They had a single mom, and we were down there all the time doing something, and they would get in these fights all the time, like fist fights. The brothers would lock each other out of the house. They would. I mean, these kids were. I mean, I'm surprised they never got arrested. They could have gotten arrested. I don't even know, but they were badass kids, right? And I can remember once they lived in a duplex, these two houses together. They lived on one side of it, and the mom was at work. She was a nurse, so she was always working. It seemed just to kind of make ends meet. I don't know where the dad was. The dad had gone way before we ever moved there. And I can remember Ronnie, the older one, got this transistor radio, and for you millennials, a transistor radio was just a little radio. It looked like a Walkman. You probably don't even know what that is either. It was just a little radio, probably AM only, and you're switching batteries out every 5 minutes. So Ronnie takes Johnny's bike and hangs it on a telephone pole. So back then, we called them telephone poles. They had a street light on them, and they had these handles on them. So when the lineman came out, they had these little hooks. They'd put a couple manual ones on so we didn't climb the poles, and they would climb up. Well, Ronnie figured out a way to take Johnny's bike and hang it on this telephone pole, like up high, like, I don't know, 15, 20 feet, where Johnny couldn't get it. So Johnny comes outside. He's standing on this porch. It's about 4 feet high, and he takes that radio of Ronnie's and says, "Hey," and he looks over at him and he throws it on the ground, just crushes it into a million pieces, and then runs in the house and locks the house. Johnny can't get in. Excuse me, Ronnie can't get in the house. At that time, Ronnie goes down the side of the house, and Johnny's kneeling on the stove, looking out the window, looking out the glass window at mocking, making fun of Ronnie at the time. Like, you can't get in the house, and too bad for you. You can't get in the house. And Ronnie was he was a large kid, and he was mean, and he fought a lot. Johnny's got his face up against this window, and Ronnie punches him through the window. Now, keep in mind, no safety glass back then. This is panes of glass that when they broke, they came down in these sheets of glass. It slice your arm right off your fucking body if you caught it wrong. These were not safety glass. It didn't break into a bunch of little pieces and kept you safe. So Ronnie knocks Johnny, almost knocks him out, knocks him off of this stove onto the floor. Ronnie's arm is gushing blood because this panes of glass came down and cut his arm. Somebody calls the mom. The mom comes home, take Ronnie to the hospital, and then the next fight ensued probably a week later. I mean, these guys were doing stuff all the time. I remember playing darts at their house one time, and I don't know how old I was, five, I don't know, I was probably 8 or 9. And in this TikTok video I was talking about, this woman mentioned getting a dart thrown into your calf and having a dart hang out of your leg. That happened to me. They threw a dart at my leg and it stuck in my calf, and it's funny. Not so funny, but we were kids, stuck in it, pulled it out, it bled a little bit, you wiped it off, and you went on, played darts. I mean, the stories, I'm going to keep telling a bunch of them. I got a bunch of them. We were, I don't know, we had nothing to do one day, and my dad had a Honda 160 motorcycle, this little red chrome, I think it was a 160. And we were bored, so what do you do when you're bored? You put gasoline in a jar, and you start things on fire. So we were in their backyard one day, and we were pouring a little bit of gas out, lighting it on fire, stamping it out with our feet and everything. And I went to pour some gasoline out, and the jar was wet from the gasoline we had spilled on there, and it slipped out of my whole hand and breaks on the ground. Now we've got a 10-foot round circle of fire, not a 10-inch. And thank God we got this fire out of it. It would have burnt the house down. I mean, just the stuff we got involved in. There was a canyon by our house, and we used to go make jumps. And when I grew up later, I have nice bicycles now that we go mountain bike riding and everything. Back then, we had shit for bikes, right? We had whatever we could scrape up and put together is what we had. And I can remember going over the handlebar, having the handlebars go all the way forward because we didn't have the nut tight enough, or the spacer in there or something. Landing right on our happy parts and just about breaking legs and arms. I mean, sliding down the side of this canyon on cardboard boxes that felt like 100 miles an hour. I'm sure we weren't obviously going that fast, but it was the things that we came up with that entertained us, right? If we didn't have a ball, we had tape, we had socks, we'd make a ball. We didn't have a bat, we'd use a broomstick. I had the mumps when I was 10 years old, and I had to stay in bed for like 2 weeks, all of Christmas vacation. I remember getting a sore throat on a Friday, and my um, glands got really swollen, and I had the mumps. Something I don't even know if anybody gets mumps anymore. But back then, we used to get them, and I got them. And about 2 weeks after laying on that couch and getting through Christmas and everything, and getting a new football for school, and I mean, excuse me, for Christmas and all that, my parents finally on New Year's Day let me go out and play, and we played. We were playing in the street. Well, my uncle was over there one day for that holiday, and he took one of my dad's push broomsticks and cut it in half so we'd have a bat. Um, Idiot. I mean, idiot. I'm lucky my dad wasn't there when it happened. He probably would have beat the shit out of the guy. But of course, a week later, he found out that he cut this broom handle in half. So now I was the only one that I could handle the broom. So because I wasn't smart enough to tell him not to cut the broom handle, my dad made me use the broom for the next 6 weeks because it was only half as long as it used to be, and I was the only one that could use the broom. So, but back to Ronnie and Johnny, we used to ride bikes down to Jack in the Box. They had a Jack in the Box at El Cajon Boulevard in Euclid. It's still there actually, but we would ride through the alleys. They had alleys behind, in between the in between the streets, and we would fly down these alleys because there was really no traffic or anything, but you'd have to cross over a main street every block, right? So you'd go down the alley, you'd slow down, you'd look for traffic, and then you'd go. Well, one time Ronnie's on this bitchin' 10 speed that he had saved up and bought. I don't even know. I think he worked and probably bought this really nice 10-speed bicycle. And he's flying way past us. So he gets maybe, 20 yards ahead of us. And he does not slow down for this main street and hit T-bones a car, right? He goes flying. Remember, no helmets, no pads, no shit, nothing. Ends up breaking his collarbone. From that accident. Here he calls mom again. Here she comes home. Take these. I swear she was a nurse. She probably spent most of her overtime on these kids, patching them up, doing something for them. And we had fat lips all the time. We had black eyes. I'm trying to think of more stuff that happened down in when we were in San Diego. And I'm not just telling you all this bad news. First of all, I don't think it's bad news. It was just the way we grew up. I was involved in the pass and kick thing down at Kalina Park. We used to go down there and play football. I can remember playing football with a guy once. My brother had this group of friends that I got old enough I could play in sports with them. And my brother was pretty small. I was a larger child, so I was able to play sports with these kids. And I was a decent athlete. So I can remember one of the guys going out for a pass, running full speed with his head turned, looking back where the ball was going to land and run right into a tree and knock himself out. That was funny. Everybody had a nickname. I'm not going to mention the nicknames in case I don't know who watches this, but I don't want to embarrass them. But I've seen these people as adults, and it's no big deal. We all just the way we grew up. My brother, we fought a lot in school too. My mom, we had these kids that were the last name was Tucker, and they were always bullying my brother. This one kid. And I went to school with a kid named Jesse Tucker, and he went to school with another kid, his older brother. And this kid would bully my brother all the time. Like I said, my brother was not very big. He's only 5'6" now, so he's not a big guy. And my mom made him go and fight this kid. I mean, you're not going to listen. If you don't go fight this kid, he's going to keep bullying you, and he's always going to take advantage of you. So, it was kind of like the Christmas Story when Ralphie finally just had enough, and he just starts beating the crap out of that bully. My mom made us go do that. She says, "Look, you're never gonna, be free if you don't go fight this kid." And that happened to me a couple times too, where my mom said, "Look, you're gonna have to go. You're gonna have to fight this kid." And we didn't want to do it, but the reality is when you're a kid that age, you're not gonna get really hurt. You're gonna get a couple bumps and bruises. You're probably gonna learn the chain of command in the neighborhood, who's toughest, who's not. I know saying that these days in a school, the teachers would all pass out, the chain of command. political people would be coming out of the, woodwork. What do you mean the chain of command? You shouldn't be tough. If you're tough, it shouldn't matter. Well, it mattered then. If you were a badass, you got stuff that other people didn't get. It's the way it was. You didn't get picked on. Maybe you did the picking. I don't know. But we all grew up. We all grew out of that, hopefully. And that's just the way it happened. I mean, I got in fights all the time. It wasn't that unusual. You stood up for yourself back then. You didn't let people bully you. If you got in a fight at school, they pretty much broke you up, made you shake hands, and go back to class. That's the way it happened. You didn't have the police called. Police didn't give a shit about you guys fighting like that. It was two boys fighting, two girls fighting, whatever. Listen, the neighborhood I grew up in, there were girls that were tougher than any guys I'd ever seen. There was a lot of families that were, we lived in a very multicultural place, and there were some families that I would much rather fight the brothers than I would the girls back then. By the way, my sisters got in fights too. It wasn't like we're the only ones that ever fought. We had this friend I used to go. My brother had a paper route. He'd get up every morning at like 4 a.m. and deliver papers on a bicycle. Yes, that really happened. It wasn't wrong. It wasn't a fallacy for you millennials. And I used to go maybe once a week. I'd go with this friend of my sister's, and he knew the whole family. He lived down the street, and I would get up and go with him. We'd put rubber bands on these papers, put them in a bag, put them on a rack on the bike, and then he had a route, and he'd go throw the papers, throw them hopefully in the right place. This kid, he was riding a motorcycle. His family was into riding motorcycles. I think they were in the desert or something. But keep in mind, in San Diego when we were kids, you could go up by Miramar, by the air station off of Kearney Villa Road, and drive your truck onto the dirt there and ride motorcycles right there. I don't know if it was an air station. It could have been, but that was a whole off-road. The 15 wasn't there, so you could just pull over to the side of the road with your motorcycles, get them out of your truck, and go crazy. We could do that in Poway. We could ride all over the place. But this guy that I used to go on the paper out with, he ended up breaking both of his arms. So he had 2 casts on, full arm casts, from his armpit down to his hand, and they were bent. So, there was in a 90-degree bend. And I can remember his mom. I don't know how he got paid for but his mom used to make him go to the store, and he'd come down the street with bread, across his arms, like he'd have to, or bags hanging off his hands. So you understand, when we got hurt, it didn't mean we were down for the count. We had to go out and do whatever. God, when we moved to Poway once, I crashed on our hill on a skateboard, and I was screwed up, man. I could hardly walk. I had cut my face, my arms, my elbows, my back was all scratched up. And here comes that handy hose again. My dad says, "Look, get the paint out. You're going to have to pour water over that stuff to get the stinging out." And we had chlorine in our water back then, a lot of it, enough to kill anything. You can kill you. And they'd hose you off, and it would sting like a son of a bitch, and then you'd go do your thing. So at that time when that happened, I was working for a realtor that sold us our house, and I had to go up and water this lawn for this rental he had. And I was like, Dad, can you go mow the lawn? He's like, no, or water the lawn. He's like, no, you shouldn't have crashed, you dumbass. There's that dumbass word again. I don't even know if they use the word dumbass, but it sounds appropriate. And up to there, I'd have to go up there. I was all scraped up, had to water the lawn, I crashed on a 3-wheeler on Bulldog down in Garden Road, scraped up my back, had no helmet. I had OP shorts on and Vans. And I flipped the bike backwards and slid down the hill on my back, holding onto the bike because it was my sister's boyfriend, and I didn't want to get screwed up. And same thing, come home, on my back's just a big rash, and my dad makes me jump in the pool to get the stinging out. So you wonder why we think we're tough, like we're badasses? That shit happened all the time. I mean, I've got guys that lost fingers. We had a BB gun wars when I finally moved to Poway. I grew up with another couple brothers named Rob and Donnie, and Rob and Donnie were like Ronnie and Johnny. They fought all the time, and there was always some shit going on between them. I can remember, I don't even know where the hell we got BB guns, but we had them, and we had BB gun wars. And I was on Rob's team one day, and Donnie was with another guy, and Jesus, I get my Ronnies and Johnnies and Robs and Donnies mixed up. And Rob put that gun up and waited for his brother Donnie to pop his head up, and as soon as he did, he shot him right in the eye, right underneath. God forbid. I mean, God, thank you. It didn't hit him in the eyeball; it hit him right below the eye, and of course swelled up. Had a, I think the BB stuck in his eye too, by the way. So he had to go to the doctor and get this BB removed from his eye. But that's the shit we did when we were kids, man. There was nothing else to do. We didn't have computers. We didn't have, handheld games. The first game I ever played on TV was a Pong game, if you can even remember that. I wish I had it now. It's probably worth $1 million. I never watched the color TV until we moved to Poway, until I was 12 years old. We always had black and white TVs. And I hope you boomers are listening to this going, up, yep, I remember that happened to me. Yep, same thing. Because I know it happened to you. And that's just kind of the way we grew up. Understand, we didn't have the technology that you have now. And was it bad? I mean, I love the technology we have now. Look what I can do right now. I can put a podcast on and it can get broadcast across the world tomorrow, right? Or when I'm done with it, I can save it, put it on YouTube, and people can watch it all over the world. Is it better for you? I don't know, man. We learned some pretty good lessons, some really valuable lifelong lessons back then. We seemed to be around family more back then. Um, we didn't have as much distractions. We didn't have Kardashians. We didn't have all this stuff going on. Although you had some movie stars and things that might have been involved in some shit. We didn't care. We didn't read that stuff. We watched and played sports. That's what we did. And didn't even watch sports that much. We played sports. Um, God, we were hanging out at Rob and Donnie's house one night, and Rob just kept antagonizing Donnie. Donnie was the older one. He was a little bigger. He was tougher than all of us. He ended up going to the Navy and doing some pretty cool stuff. And Donnie liked to fish, so he had a fishing rod in his room, and Donnie kept pushing his buttons, making fun of him and stuff. And Donnie got that fishing rod out and whacked Rob in his legs about 4 times and put welts like the size of a pencil on his leg. And you didn't go bitch to your mom, because your mom would say, well, you dumbass, you shouldn't have done that to Donnie, right? You shouldn't have antagonized. You knew he was going to hurt you. He told you, but he did it anyway. And he knew there was going to be a reaction. And again, man, when I was in high school, I got in several fights in high school, and we would, I'll tell you, one time I was fighting, this guy had done something to me. He was standing on, they have these temporary rooms they bring it to Poway High at the time. They were at Poway High. And they had about 4 steps that go up. So they had this little staircase that was a platform. And this guy reached down and hit me in the back of the head. And I grabbed him and pulled him down the stairs. And then I started wailing on him, right? So I'm like uppercutting him. I got him in a headlock and I'm hitting him in the face. And I feel this arm grab me on my shoulder and trying to pull me his direction. Well, when he did that, I thought it was somebody else that was going to get involved in the fight. And I got my hand back, and when I turned around, I went to hit the guy, and it was the teacher. So he closes his eyes because he thinks he's going to get popped, and ends up being my basketball coach that I was going to have about 2 years later. Not a good person to punch. I didn't punch him. I caught myself before I took the swing, but if it would have happened any quicker, I might have punched this guy right in the face. Now I probably would have got expelled from school for that, but I got suspended. Got suspended a few times for fighting in school. It just wasn't that big a deal. We didn't have people shooting up schools. We didn't have people, you get in a fight as a teenager, and like you said, you'd end up with a couple of bruises and bumps and scrapes. And you learn that fighting was not the answer. You learn that fighting hurts, especially if you're not good at it. I had the hell beat out of me a couple times by people. I picked fights with the wrong guy, and you start learning that chain of command. So you're careful about that. And I could have done a very similar podcast to this and tell you about a bunch of good stuff. And I'm not done with the podcast, but the reason I wanted to make a point with some of these things is I think that baby boomers, for the most part, will tell you that they're much tougher than millennials, right? We grew up in a different time. We walked everywhere. We rode skateboards everywhere. I did not have a bike as a kid. As a teenager, I really didn't have a bike. So I swear to God, I put 20,000 miles on a skateboard. And when you wanted to go somewhere, you didn't have 19 parents come up and split. You fucking rode a skateboard. You rode a bus when you had to. We hitchhiked a couple times. Our parents were not there to coddle us. They were not there to make sure we had everything. They went to work to make sure we had everything we needed. We did not need to have our arms around us all the time and say, Ed, it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be. We didn't have that shit. We grew up tough. My dad, when he used to teach me how to do things, he said, "Look, I'm going to show you one time." Taught me how to change spark plugs in a car, on an 8-cylinder car. For you millennials, look up spark plugs. I can't even explain them to you. And a V8, there's 8 cylinders. It's a long story. But anyway, I'd have to change spark plugs, and we'd have to. Oh shit! What is it? You gotta gap the spark plugs, right? So you have a tool that gaps the spark plug. And you have to know what the gap is on that spark plug. You take it out, you put it in. We used to have to do points and plugs, right? So you had to change points in the distributor, and that's how we tuned up our cars. We didn't have Jiffy Lubes or all that shit. We changed our own oil. We did all that stuff. So my dad, he'd tell you, "I'm going to show you how to do this one time. Get it done the first time I show you." And you did not say, "Dad, can you show me again?" You fucking listened the first time, and you did it the first time. I can remember being out with him in the garage working on something, and he'd, that wrench would slide off, and he'd bust his knuckles on a motor. And when that happened, you heard it. You hit the ground because there was a wrench coming through the garage, more than likely towards the firewall of the kitchen, because he would throw a wrench if. And I've done that before too, by the way. I didn't ever hit a kid with it, and he never hit me with it either. But that was the stuff. Now, in the good news, I had a '67 Volkswagen with a blown motor. That was my first car. I borrowed $250 from my mom, which she expected that paid back at a certain time, and that was the deal. And if it wasn't paid back, it was her car. But me and my dad, we got a book for dummies to how to do a rebuild on a Volkswagen motor, and that's the good stuff, right? So we spent this time together rebuilding this engine, and I learned how to do things. And I learned how to apply what I read to what we're doing. So these are all the things we talk about when we say this is where it was an advantage to us being a baby boomer, right? We had to figure shit out. We didn't have YouTube. We had to read, or we had to hang out with a guy that knew engines, and we would hang out with them, and they would show us, and then we would apply the same things. And I remember breaking bolts. I was always tightening bolts down to when bam, they would snap. And my dad would say, "God damn it, Edward." Called me Edward. He would say, "How many times am I going to tell you?" And so, when that bolt snapped, I didn't have another bolt. I had to wait till I found one or got to the store, if I could even find one at the store, if I could even have any money to get a new bolt for my bike or whatever. So you start figuring out, don't snap the bolt, right? You don't have another one. These are all these great things as baby boomers that we learn. For Christ's sake, my wife can change oil on a car if she has to, or change a tire. We were at a party a while back, and there was a millennial, self-proclaimed millennial. He was the comedian at this party, and he was talking. He says, "I grew up without a dad. My mom did her best, and she did this, and she taught me how to make macaroni and cheese, and this and that. But if I ever got a flat tire, I don't know what I'd do." And he says, "Does anybody here know how to change a flat tire?" Except for, and he points to me, except for that guy. I know he knows how to change a flat tire, and I do. I knew how to do all that stuff. When we moved into our last apartment, the guy says, "Oh, you don't know how to work on stuff?" I said, "No, I do. I just don't want to. You own the house. You can fucking work on it. I'm not paying, I know how to do it all. I learned all that when I grew up. I just got sick of it. I don't like working on cars. I did it my whole life. I had to do it so I could get to work. And if I couldn't get the car fixed, I had to hitchhike or take a bus or call a friend and, or walk. I walked to work before, and it was a long way. And, you got up at 5 a.m. if you had to get a ride and the guy was coming by at that time. That's what you did. So to the kid with the beanie and the long hair, and this podcast could probably last 3 hours of some of the shit that happened when we were kids and the stuff we learned. Now, fast forward to when 1995, I got my first computer, my first personal computer. I had to swing a deal with a guy to get a computer. I went and got a book that was called Computers for Dummies and read it from cover to cover and learned how to use a computer. Because that's what we did. We had to figure out ways to do stuff. I've roofed houses before. I paid in houses. I've done all that stuff because I didn't have the money to pay someone to do it. Roof a house one day in your life and carry packs of roofing material up a ladder until all the packs are up on top of the roof. Do that one time, you'll never want to roof a house again. You'll go out and get a really good job so a roofer can do it. We didn't have machines that pulled the roofing material up. We crawled up ladders with roofing material over our shoulder. We didn't have rototillers and all that stuff. We ended up getting that stuff later, but when you had to dig a hole, you dug a hole, right? And that's the way it was. We didn't have pool guys when we were kids. We worked on the pool. Thank God we had a pool. But you brushed the pool. And when your dad told you something, you did it. You didn't. I can remember coming home from work one day. I worked nights when I was a kid, when I was like 18. And my friend and I were going to go to the beach. So I get off at 8:30. I come home from work. Excuse me, I had to get a drink there. Come home from work. My dad says, what are you doing today? I said, well, I'm going to the beach with my buddy. He says, mow the lawn. I said, all right. So I went outside, got the lawnmower out, called my buddy, said, look, before we go, I got to mow the lawn. He says, no, man. We're going to the beach. I said, no, I got to mow the lawn. As soon as I'm done, we'll go. He says, no. I said, listen, my dad told me to mow the lawn and I'll be over when I'm done. He says, you tell your dad that you'll mow the lawn later. I said, I'll tell you what, why don't you come over and tell my dad I'll mow the lawn later. And while he's beating the shit out of you, I'll mow the lawn. Okay. Because that's the way it would have worked. And funny thing, you'll hear this before from baby boomers. They'll say, well, if I would have done something down the street and a parent came out and saw me doing it and it was wrong and they spanked me, my dad would have said, well, you shouldn't have done it. Not that my parents, it was okay for people to abuse us, but if we did something fucking stupid and it was dangerous or whatever, and that parent took charge of that and did something, that was what it was, right? Keep in mind, when I was a kid, when I was in elementary school, they had paddles, and a principal would paddle you. It might be 3 or 4 shots, and it never happened to me. I wasn't going to get paddled, so I didn't do anything stupid. You see how when you have a consequence, sometimes you don't do stuff stupid. You kind of think about what you're doing. We had in 5th grade, I had a teacher named Mr. Henderson, and he would have you do these exercises. This guy, I think he was a Marine or something. He was just built like this really stocky guy. He wasn't super tall, but super stocky guy, in really good shape. And he used to hold his hands out in front of him, and he would make all of us do that. And if you were the last one standing with your hands in front of you, just like this, you would hold your hands out. The next day, you wouldn't have to do it, or something. There was some reward you would get if you could do it. And it was just it was kind of a mental and physical exercise he would make us do at the end of the day. No one cared. You go and tell your parents, they didn't give a shit. They're like, well, did you do it? Yeah. Did you win? No. Why not? Why aren't you going to win tomorrow? I'm going to try. Well, then there you go. There you go. You win tomorrow. You bust your ass. You try harder. I know one thing he used to do to us, if you got caught talking in class or something, he'd put a circle. He'd make you stand up at the chalkboard, and he'd put a circle about an inch higher than your nose, and he wants your nose in that circle, right? So what are you doing? You're on your calves. You're on your tiptoes. Maybe 10 minutes, 15. I don't even know how long. It was long enough where your calves hurt. And if you drop down, he'd add another 5 minutes. I mean, we'd do push-ups in class. It was just, listen, I told you earlier, I'm not insulting millennials. We have some, I deal with millennials on a regular basis. They're the greatest kids in the world. They work hard. I have millennials that are kids. They work hard. They do their stuff. They're doing the right stuff for their kids. They're teaching them. Was it a little drastic when I was growing up? I mean, to today's standards, yes, I think it looked like it was drastic. Back then, if you listened, everything was good. If you were an asshole, it wasn't good. Police would arrest you. You could get in trouble. You could get beat up. You talk about hanging around the wrong people. If we hung around the wrong people, I didn't have to worry about those guys beating me. I had to worry about my dad kicking my ass. My dad hit me 2 times in my life. One time when I threw a football at my brother. I told you that story. And the other time he spanked us when we were in Washington doing something. I don't know, we were just laughing or something, and he knew he wasn't spanking us very hard. It wasn't. We continued laughing when he left, just quieter, so he didn't have to come down again. But it wasn't like we were getting abused, right? I learned some shit in my life, right? I learned how to handle stuff. I've learned how to get into bad situations and get myself out. I've become resourceful. I've been able to help my kids. Our kids probably grew up halfway in between what I did and halfway between what the kids are doing now. My youngest is 27. So, did we have punishments for the kids? Of course we did. Did they respect us? I think so. I mean, I can call any one of them right now and talk to them. So we did something right with our kids. Is the technology you guys have the greatest thing in the world? Unbelievable, the technology we have now. Were things different? Yeah, yeah, things were different, but it was different in a good way. And I don't look down at millennials for anything. You know, when we had lazy kids when we were kids, and people will complain that millennials don't want to work and this and that. Listen, we had kids that didn't want to fucking work either, and they didn't, and they were just dumbasses. They were just the lazy kids that were never going to do anything in life. Look, if you want a formula for not having anything when you grow up, don't do anything. There's your formula. Be lazy and don't learn new things and don't do any of that. That's your formula for growing up if you want to be a dumbass. If you want to be successful, read, uh, watch videos, talk to baby boomers. I saw a meme the other day that says, you know what, when your parents are in their 60s, they're getting to their 70s, sit down and talk to them. Listen to what they have to say. They have some incredibly worldly knowledge that you're never going to learn in this time. There's a lot of wisdom in those eyes, right? There's a lot of wisdom in what us baby boomers know. And we know there's a lot of wisdom in what you know too. And I always kid with people, and I read it in a book somewhere that you have to have a mentor under 30, right? So when I started this podcast, I went to my mentor under 30 and said, how do I start this podcast? Teach me how to use the cameras and lights and all those things. If you didn't know, there's a green screen behind me. I have lights, multiple screens, microphones, obviously. I have software I've had to learn, but I can only do this because I had a millennial to go back to and say, dude, can you help me out? Right. We have a lot of knowledge to share and we should continue to do that. Uh, when somebody, look, you can't change the circumstances of when you grew up. It's just what it is. Um, I can tell you that a lot of us baby boomers screwed up you millennials, by the way. We allowed you to have too much. We weren't hard enough on you sometimes. And that could be from a lot of different things. I was divorced twice before. I'm married 20 years now. And I had a lot of guilt with my children. And I might have let them get away with a little bit more than I should have. But it's what it is. It's in the past, and I can't change that now. We have a great relationship we can talk about. So I'll wrap this up now, and maybe we do another podcast about this in the future. But to my baby boomer friends, I get it, and I know you get me. And when I was telling some of those, I know you were shaking your head. Yep, that happened to me, and you probably got even better stories than I have. And I've probably forgotten 100 stories that I could have told on this podcast that would have been entertaining, funny, dangerous. Thank God we lived through it, right? If you listen to this, we lived through it. And, we ate crappy food. We ate whatever. I mean, we did all kinds of things. We smoked cigarettes. We, breathed in crappy smog. We've done all kinds of things. We drink too much. We do a lot of things that can harm us, but it's the way we grew up. I mean, you imagine I was smoking once, this was years ago, and somebody said, why do you smoke? I said, well, I grew up in a house with two Pall Mall non-filter smokers in the house with black coffee, no windows open, nothing, because it was cold outside or whatever. And so I was smoking when I was fucking 5. I mean, I wasn't physically holding a cigarette up to my mouth, but I was definitely breathing in enough smoke to harm me. So is it right? Nope. Do I blame my parents? No. What it is, I have two siblings that never smoked in their life, so it wasn't just them. I mean, whatever. Listen, I have a great respect for every generation. We were raised by what they call the greatest generation ever. They're for you millennials. We could say that we're tougher than you. That generation, just I can't even hold a candle to that generation. The shit they had to put up with, and then having to go to war if they had to go to war or something. The stuff they saw, the stuff they had to do. I'm like a little 4-year-old girl in a dress just thinking about that because I couldn't. Well, I guess I would have done what I had to do, but we were raised by some badass. I'm going to say a bad word. It's BAMF, right? badass mother effers. And my dad, man, I could tell you stories about how tough he was. He couldn't hold a can. I couldn't hold a candle to him as far as when it came to toughness. We don't think you're weak. We don't think you're weak. We know that you had a different lifestyle, and we know that you're smarter than we were, and you've learned more things. You're more educated than we are, and we appreciate that, and we appreciate you. And I appreciate the boomers that listened into this. Like I said, I know you were sitting there shaking your head, smiling. And maybe one day we get a boomer on here with me, and we can, you know, we can exchange some more stories. Or I get a millennial on here. I've had millennials on before, and they're always fantastic kids. So this is the Ed Franklin No Limits podcast. I appreciate you listening. I will advertise this. I'll have this out on Facebook and LinkedIn and everywhere tomorrow. You can always contact me at edfranklin.nolimits.com. No, that wasn't it. Let's try again. You can always contact me at edfranklin.nolimits@gmail.com. You can go to my website at www.edfranklinnolimits, no dot in there, .com, and check it out. It's a work in progress. All you millennials could help me out with that, by the way, with my website. But contact me anytime. You can always email me and ask a question. Give me suggestions, give me content, whatever you want to do. I appreciate all of you listening. This thing's growing. It's getting better. I want to be a light for you. I don't want to just sit here and bitch about people. I want to be a light. I don't want to talk about negativity. I want to talk about how we can take what we have now, all these things we've developed, and make them better for people, not worse. I don't want to hurt anybody. I want to help. So edfranklin.nolimits@gmail.com. Have a fantastic weekend. Tomorrow is the 1st of June. I can't believe it goes by. That's the last little warning I'll give you millennials. Time goes by fast, man. Cherish those children. Cherish your parents, your friends, your relatives. Time flies by so fast, you're not even going to believe it. So anyway, thank you for listening. I appreciate you, and we'll talk to you soon.